Hello and welcome back to the Ron Talks Tabletop Podcast, Super Show Sunday. This Sunday, as I have in many of these episodes, I have a special guest to have a conversation with. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Ron. My name's Bob Dunn. I've been a 5+ year player of Super Show, former world champion, former player of the year, and currently, among my other roles, I am the general manager of the Underworld Championship, and I got a shot at the tag team titles coming up too. It's all kind of coming together again, Ron.
That's great. Now, of course, we're going to talk about your general manager role at the Underworld division and talk about some other things, which is the reason why I invited you onto the podcast. Now, if you folks may recall, I did a vlog back in November. He was one of the guys that I interviewed. And also, Bob is the guy that introduced me to the game back in July last year when I stumbled upon the game at Dice Tower East. One of the things that I wanted to talk to him about because I was very curious about is so Super Show is not your first tabletop game hobby because I know a little bit about your story. We'll talk about that a little bit. But how did you get into tabletop hobby gaming in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm 42, going on 43 years old. I have a pretty far back history here. My really first sort of competitive tabletop gaming was probably actually the Lord of the Rings trading card game back when that came out around the turn of the century. I played the Decipher game all the way through the movie releases and really enjoyed that. Played it while I was up in college with my roommate and friends up there. But of course, Decipher, lost that license and that game it's still played occasionally at Dragon Con. I know it's one of the lost games that still gets played a good bit because I think the system was great. But the next time I came back up into competitive gaming of any kind really was around the Star Wars dice game
Destiny.
Destiny. That was what I was playing right before I got into Super Show, actually. I had picked up Destiny in the first years. I really enjoyed having a Star Wars game to play. Destiny, for all of its faults, was a pretty entertaining game. So, I was playing competitively at Gen Con and Origins for Destiny when I sort of sidled into playing Super Show.
I never got into Destiny, but I'm sure you are aware that this weekend is the official release of another Star Wars trading card game.
I'm
Uh,
very aware. I'm very aware. It'll be the first game besides Super Show that I pick up in a long time, really seriously, I think.
So just kind of getting back to that previous topics, but how did you get into Super Show? Like, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, the story behind that is I was playing Destiny at my local store, which is House Rules Gaming here in Kissimmee, Florida. And our store owner goes regularly to Gamma, the gaming convention, and then to Origins. He had been doing that every year prior to the convention, especially. So shout out to Chris Savoy, the guy who did the legwork for us. He went to Origins, and I guess that would be 2017 Origins. At that point, that was, 3 years into the history of Super Show being sort of a national public game. He got the demo from general manager John Calais and from the boss Steve Resk. He saw the potential and how fun the game could. He picked up a whole bunch of product, which looked a lot different at that time. Product in Super Show looked a lot different in those days. Chinese food containers and hastily printed starter boxes and packs like that. But he brought all those things back and set them up in the store and said, "You want to see an interesting game I learned?" So, that was me going into the shop to play Destiny 1 or 2 days a week and picking up Super Show alongside it. We very quickly formed a group because, we were watching the WWE pay-per-views. We would get together on a Sunday night, play Super Show in the shop and watch the pay-per-view together, which is a, pretty good bonding experience for groups. So, that's sort of where the whole Florida play group got started and really the whole Deep South play group got started.
That's cool. I was down there back in January. A lot of great people down there.
Florida Playgroup has contributed in a lot of different ways to the success and the long-term popularity of Super Show.
Yes, it certainly has. So you mentioned like the impact of the Deep South region. You were involved with the Deep South regional belt. And for folks who are following along who aren't familiar with Super Show, Super Show has like a number of titles that are competed for nationally, and then there's also like three major regions: the Deep South, the Midwest Coast, which is basically the U.S. Midwest and everything west, and then the Tri-State, which is like the Northeast. And each of those regions have their own championship belts. I have to say that the thing that hooked me into actually like trying to play this competitively is actually seeing the Deep South title belt.
It's a nice title, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, the history behind that is pretty interesting. Again, it started in 2018. That was basically my competitive debut was 2018 at PAX Unplugged. I went up to PAX Unplugged and I saw the play group. The established play group at that time was mostly Northeast, right? I mean, it was mostly the Northeast,
right.
New York, New Jersey area, and then Ohio and Kentucky had their own thing that they were working on. This was around the time that Twitch streaming started to sort of take off. The company started doing Talk of the Universe, which was the Wednesday night show that they run on Twitch, where they talk about all the belts and everything that's happening. Because at that time, every Talk of the Universe was the boss, Steve Resk, and the general manager. I got tired of hearing constantly about how the tri-state was the best part of the country. They had basically invented the tri-state title. At that time, it was just the New York, New Jersey title. It was the only places you could compete for it. And no one who played anywhere else in the country had anything else except for Kentucky, who had invented the bluegrass title at the time. At the first Sunshine SmackDown, which happened in 2020, we decided, okay, we're tired of hearing about the Northeast all the time. Let's get our own belt going. And you can blame me, as many people do, for the formation of the regions that we have now. Because when I printed the Deep South belt, I just looked up a map of the Deep South online and picked all the states that that map touched and said, those are all Deep South now. So it extends over to Kentucky, or it extends up to Kentucky, over to Texas, doesn't go any further west than Texas. And at that time, the company was regularly going to PAX South, which was in San Antonio, and had a big San Antonio play group. There were play groups that were forming in Oklahoma and northern Texas. We wanted to make sure to be inclusive of all those. So we were trying to make the Deep South title, something that could be run around between all of those play groups in theory. And so, yeah, I didn't really ask for permission as much as I would have begged for forgiveness if somebody said it was wrong. But, we produced the Deep South title. We decided it was going to be defended at the first Sunshine SmackDown, and that was the beginning of the Deep South.
Oh wow, I didn't know any of that. So basically, we have you to blame for this whole regional.
Yes, when Kentucky says we belong in the Midwest instead of the Deep South, they can blame me. That's absolutely true. Yeah, there's definitely strong feelings right now about who should be in what regions, and the main reason that the map is what it is because I put the map on the belt.
Moving on to like the national scene in general, you are the GM of the Underworld title division. And so, how did you end up becoming the GM of that division?
Every general manager's position is, I think of it in terms of the way people talk about serving the president, right? We serve at the pleasure of the overall general manager, John Calais. You have to be invited. You can't really beg or politic for a position that'll just get you disqualified. So, any of the national titles that exist right now serve at the pleasure of the GM, John Calais. I was one of the Underworld champions before I became world champion. And so when the former Underworld general manager had to take a leave and basically, left his position, I was invited. It's a good bit of work. I certainly enjoy it. It comes with some sniping from people at times, as does any public role, of course. It is an interesting bit of work in terms of trying to balance what is fair for people and what is best for the game and the belt. There's never been a time where that's been more true than right now. I'm sure you've got more questions. But like we're going into Grand Gathering season. For those of you who don't know, Grand Gathering is our largest convention, our largest get together of the year, where pretty much 95% of the entire Super Show community is expected to be there. And one of the pressures is, we like to have all the belts defended at Grand Gathering. So, it's a challenge to figure out who's going to be there, make sure that the person who's going to be there is both representing the belt well and is going to be in attendance. So, it's a challenging time, and that's before any of the changes that are coming up to Super Show divisions competitively with Project Spider.
Right. A little bit about the Underworld division. I'm curious. We have all the national titles: the World title, the Underworld title, tag team titles, Tornado, Trios, US, and Hardcore, which was retired for a little bit and now it's back. I've heard people talk about the Underworld title as being kind of like the workhorse title, like
Yeah.
it's the title right below the world title. But it seems like, for a number of reasons, people have even more respect for the Underworld champion than even the world champion, just because of the nature of the belt and how things are run. And I've seen like the previous guy, the big guy, had a great run with it, and I think he represented the division well. Why do you think that people regard the Underworld division in such high regard?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. Number one is the list of people who can get underworld shots is wider. Getting a world title shot is more restrictive. There are more constraints placed on the getting shots at that title. It is also true that the underworld title generally is defended more frequently. That's not always the case, but generally that's the case. And because of the context of the underworld title, the bonus that it gives you, it's just harder to defend, right? The world title can push any skill on your bottom half of your skill set by +2. And that makes defending that title much easier. The underworld title just lets you draw a card when you roll one of your top 3 skills. So the ability to defend the belt is much harder. So when you see a string of defenses like Big Guy had, it's a much more worthy set of defenses than you might see if you're looking at world title contenders. The other thing I think is, and we tried to establish this during my reign as general manager, which is I want everybody to win something to get a shot at the underworld title, right? It's not something that we give out. We want you to actually have won something to earn your shot. We are always looking for next contenders, but usually it's in a number one contenders match. Whereas world title contenders are generally selected based on some prior credential, but then that's it. They're just selected and they get their shot. It's just a different kind of mindset, I think, in terms of how you qualify and therefore, what it looks like to be the underworld champ.
Right, right. Okay. That explains some things to me that I didn't necessarily have insights into before about that. So, like, what is your approach to running the division, and what are some of the highlights of the Underworld division since you've been the GM of it?
My approach again is if you've done something worthwhile, I want you in a contenders match, but I want you to win that contenders match. We had contenders matches between Hold the Line Harry and Rambo Apocalypse, for instance. Two competitors who have both done a good bit. They both had good runs in the Intergalactic War. Rambo Apocalypse was the Holly World Heavyweight Champion for the big picture. Hold the Line Harry, of course, has been a great organizer for major events in Atlanta with ACCW. And so I felt they both deserved a chance, but they had to fight each other to get in. And that made sense both from a storyline perspective because of their feuds in the past, and because I wanted to see, a deserving contender get that shot. I think that, the biggest thing that's happened in the last few months was the big guy's request for his last defense to be in a multiplayer match against multiple former world champions. I ended up granting that request, which gave us our current champion, Shane Strickland. And, Shane is a great player. Shane's a very tactical player. And, he got that opportunity because of the champion's request. And now I'm looking at who are my next contenders in line that will earn their way in. So it's always with that mindset. You earn your way to the top of the queue for the underworld title, and I'm always watching. It's a little bit of a strange holding pattern that we're in between Grand Gathering and the Project Spider changes right now. But with those things about to clear out in May, I think we're very quickly going to get right back to contenders matches and seeing who's ready to jump in to the next step for the underworld title.
Right. I'm really curious to see how Project Spider is going to affect things. I'm certainly going to be talking about it on my podcast at some point in time in the future with somebody. Being a general manager of one of the big titles, there are challenges in the running the division. What are some of the challenges that you've run into, and also what is your approach to those challenges?
I've been fairly fortunate that people don't hound my inbox all the time. I know there are some general managers who get regular requests for title shots. I'm not a big believer in begging for title shots. I'm always doing my best to notice what's happening in the community and to acknowledge it. So again, barring right now where we're in a little bit of a holding pattern, I would normally have 4 or 5, matches in my mind for people that I wanted to have as potential number one contenders. So, and I do have those in my mind. They're just on hold for Grand Gathering right now. The challenges are mostly about scheduling, to be honest. That's the hardest part of being a general manager. The people who manage the tag titles are have it even worse. But when you've got to schedule 2 or 3 or 4 people at one time, and generally we try to stream our title matches, right, to make sure that the company gets the most visibility out of it. Getting those people all in one place at the same time with a referee and an announcer crew and a streaming team, it is not a small feat. It is not like it used to be. The titles originally were only in person, only at conventions. But our modern world allows us to defend them much more frequently with the use of technology, and getting peoples who are all on different schedules all together on the same page at the same time is definitely the most challenging thing about being a general manager in this era.
I can definitely understand that. I see. I see. I don't envy you, at all for having to do that. It's good to hear that you don't have as many people spotted down your door for a title shot.
Yeah, I mostly put those people in the ignore file. There are people who have good arguments. I've got in my head right now, I've got 3 number 1 contenders matches I would love to do. And they're gonna happen. I just don't know when. And it's largely, again, it's sort of, we're in this weird part of the year with Grand Gathering coming up where we don't want to have too much uncertainty. We know there are going to be tournaments at Grand Gathering that are going to crown number 1 contenders. We know that there are going to be title matches at Grand Gathering that are not currently planned. They're not currently scheduled. So, we basically are holding for a lot of those things. It looks like I'm doing nothing when I am actually planning for everything that's upcoming.
So I guess it makes it hard for you to really know for certain what's next for the Underworld division, right? Like, well,
Yeah, I mean the immediate next is March 24th. Hold the Line Harry, who earned his shot by beating Rambo Apocalypse, will face current champion Shane Strickland for the title on Sunday Night Fights. So that is the definite next step.
okay.
Next steps after that will depend a lot on who wins and what time we have between then and Grand Gathering, which is basically just the month of April. Shane Strickland has called out a potential opponent in Kentucky. There's a possibility that there may be a Kentucky match that he has to go through locally for him before a Grand Gathering. It just depends a lot on how this next defense will end up.
Okay, interesting. Have you had people travel to do in-person defenses for titles like outside of conventions?
I mean, the only one who's really done that is me and the Grump. We have both traveled to get our title shot. When John Polverino, Press 1P, was the world champion, this would have been 21, probably 2021 era. When John was the champion, using his own competitor, the Grump had won a number of online events. He basically consolidated all those wins into a world title shot. He converted other title opportunities into a world title shot. And he was granted that title shot with basically a competitor of his choosing among the ones that he had used for all those online wins. Rather than wait for a convention, Grump and general manager Clace basically traveled to John Polverino's house and took the title shot in person at his house and streamed it online. It's one of the best moments in Super Show history. If you've ever seen the aftermath of that, was John P throwing GM Calais in the pool after defending the title. And then Loudmouth Leo chases him into the pool. So yeah, I mean there's some great Super Show history around that one. And I think that was around 2021. And then I tried to follow that up in summer of 22. I had won my world title opportunity. That was from Origins. At Origins 22, I had basically won what GM Calais was calling the GM Calais Gauntlet, which means I had won a whole bunch of points from winning a series of events at Origins. I earned a world title shot from it. At that time, Eddie Fury was champion with his own competitor, which is very difficult in title matches, as you might be aware. As Big Bad Bobby D, I flew out to Las Vegas and met Eddie Fury and beat him for the title on the strip in Las Vegas. So there have been 2 of those kinds of travel events where the challenger has gone out of their way. And I mean, there are more examples, probably, right? Like practice site Jeremy Staggerwald, it wasn't a convention, but he went to the CAC in Philadelphia
Right.
last weekend to get his shot 2 weekends ago to get his shot in person. You know, there have been a number of in-person matches that have happened because of the timing, but those are the two that were specifically traveled just to take the title shot. You know, those are pretty fun events when they work out. They can be pretty entertaining.
It sounds like fun from particularly the Grump Wolverine one. I wish I would have
Yeah.
seen that.
Yeah, Polverino throwing Calais in the pool and then Loudmouth chasing after him in his suit was a pretty good highlight of the day.
So, what is something interesting about you that people may not know about?
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked a little bit about my medical scare last year. That is one of those things that was kept me down for a little while. I had a fairly big medical scare at the end of 22 and the start of 23, and that kept me out of Super Show much longer than I would like to have admitted. But other than that, probably the most interesting thing about me is just that I treat these games as, you know, a large part of my family. My games family are a lot of my family. I don't have any kids. My wife and I, we're near our other family, but we live largely on our own. And, you know, for me, having a games community and people that I enjoy spending time with is a huge part of both Super Show and every other game that I play. You know, to me, that's a really important part of this and something that I would definitely miss if I was ever if Super Show were to not be around or anything else were to happen like that. So I treat my work as a serious part of my life, and I treat this game as a pretty serious part of my life too.
All right. Speaking of family, your dad's in the game. He's a nice guy. I assume that you introduced him to the game.
I did. Yeah, when I was sick and I couldn't go anywhere, I had the fortune of having my dad come over pretty much regularly, almost every weekday as my in-house nurse. So when he was sitting around and I could finally get up and out of bed and move around myself, we started playing Super Show. It was a good way to bond, good way to get him familiar with the game and get him playing the game, and to the point where he enjoys coming to these conventions too. He already gave me his list for this year. He's going to Grand Gathering, Origins, and Southern Fried Gaming Expo. So if you want to see Maverick Jones, that's going to be his three stops for this year.
That's great. I mean, that's great. I mean, my dad is dead and gone, but I have kids, and like I love seeing, like I love that stuff, man. I eat it up. Whole family connection over, hobbies and what have you.
Yeah, my nephew will be next. I got to get my nephew hooked. He's only he'll be 2 months in June, or 2 years in June rather. But I got to get him hooked on the game once he can read and, and comprehend it.
Yeah, like got to have those long-term goals. Well, Bob, thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast with me. I really appreciate it. You have any other final words?
No, I think this has been great, Ron. I mean, we really appreciate your contributions in the community. I think you know, you won best production, I think, for your first year. So we're very happy and fortunate that by happenstance you sat down and took that demo from me at Dice Tower East. You know, I always am looking to grow the game. And I think that your outreach here, both through the podcast and the vlog, are a great way to continue doing that. If you're interested in Super Show, supershowthegame.com has everything you need to get started. You know, come and join us online or come out and see us in person. It's this summer's convention season is going to be really big. I know that there are big plans for Origins and Gen Con and Grand Gathering and Southern Fried, and I'm going to be at all of those. So if you can make it out, come and see me. I get you some stuff to get you started and introduce you to what it's like to take a beating from the brain.
That's right. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, folks, for listening to the podcast. Until next time, I'll see you later.